Thanks for joining me today. My name is Cindy McDonald, and I am the host of this interview series. We're looking at Generation Z and are we ready? What is it going to be when Generation Z arrives on campuses throughout the country and throughout the world? And this year we've been interviewing deans and directors at colleges to talk about this and learn a little bit more from the higher education perspective. And I'm so pleased today to have with me Christine Bowman. She is the Dean of Enrollment Services at Southwestern University. She has been involved in higher education for over 20 years, and she's worked in the industry and especially at Southwestern in a whole variety of different capacities. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks, Cindy. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation today.
So you have this background and this experience and you've seen a lot of different changes. Tell us how you got into higher education and especially in working in admissions financial aid in the first place.
Sure. So when I was in college at Southwestern, I developed a passion for understanding how public schools in the state of Texas were funded and public education was funded at the K through 12 level. So I spent 2.5 years interning at the Texas legislature as part of my political science degree and saw that making changes in the funding model, making changes in how it was awarded was like pushing a rock up a mountain, and that in my 2.5 years, no progress was made. So it was a great education on politics, but it was also a great education in an internship that taught me maybe this wasn't the best avenue for me to make change. I had interned in my admission office in college. I was a tour guide and I worked as a student caller. And in those conversations, I learned different aspects that influence students to make their decisions. I wanted to be close to Austin. I want to be close to home. I want to be far away from home. I want to be where it's warm. And I would converse with students about these things, just as, we all guide students today. And it made me realize maybe that's how I could make an impact on individuals, talking to them about the power of the liberal arts and why I was shaped and influenced by it in my own college career and how I felt like it was a worthwhile investment. And so upon graduation, I did a year at a large public research institution and graduate school that showed me in many ways my home is in the small liberal arts environment. And I came back after that year when a position became open in the Southwestern admission office and started on my journey. And that journey has taken me to work through working with visitation and the impact visits can have, working a very small out-of-state territory where I was selling Southwestern in a very different capacity than I was selling it to the Austin market, which I recruited for 15 years. I've worked with our transfer students. I've worked with our international students. I've learned how to package financial aid. And so I've seen the other side that makes this process complete. And then eventually I worked my way into the director of admission role where I became more managerial, but still having to understand the day in and day out element of recruiting and retaining a student. And then finally have been serving as the dean for the last 5 years.
Oh, wow, that sounds like quite a journey. And as you've gone through, what's significant about that is you've seen all these different aspects of the admissions process and the financial aid process. So as you've gone through that, how has the definition of change changed over the last few years? I meant the definition of need changed over the last few years.
Absolutely. Over the last 5 years, I would even go back, to the beginning of my career and 25 years. I don't know that need as a concept has changed. We have individuals that can afford to pay for college. We have individuals that need help to pay for college. And that need structure has existed throughout that entire time. But what I think has changed significantly is where institutions place the emphasis on need and how they're meeting need. So when I first started working, need was less of a broad-based issue institutionally because the funds that were available from the state government and the federal government in general would help significantly in a financial aid package, and would have a significant impact for those individuals who needed funds to go to college. So many of the institutions that I knew of, that we collaborated with or we overlapped with, really had more focus on scholarship to help recruit students, and the need was something that came through state or federal funds. And 26 years later, when the cost of education has continued to rise at somewhat meteoric rates, we know that the value of the Pell Grant has not met that need, and that many states are having to actually cut back on the funding that they're providing to students. And so what used to be covering a lot in a financial aid package is barely making a dent. The Pell Grant, even at its largest level, probably wouldn't pay for a student's board for an entire year at this point in time. And so that value has changed. And so institutions have had to then ask a very important question. Do we change our institutional structure and goal to be able to continue to meet the needs of families as cost has become more expensive? Or do we change who we recruit and change our campus structure with respect to students that come in order to accomplish this? And I think very few institutions have chose that. I think the majority of them have said, well, now as an institution, we have to pick up the tab for need in a very different way. And how do we balance that need tab versus that merit tab to meet all of the institutional goals that an institution has? But in 26 years, people still have need. So that hasn't changed. But how institutions have to accomplish paying for need or distributing dollars for needy students, that obviously has gone through a significant change.
So you mentioned merit, and how, and that becomes the balance, and that becomes the other side of the equation. So how has that definition changed, and what have you seen in that regard?
When you did the introduction to our conversation today, you talked about generations, and we're talking about Generation Z in a lot of our work now. Generation Z and probably Y before it are groups that have grown up being recognized on a regular basis. And probably in the early part of my career, merit was truly merit. It was reserved for a very small portion of your pool to recognize the truly outstanding students in your pool. And then your costs were reasonable enough that that middle class family maybe didn't get merit, but didn't qualify for need, but they could still afford to pay for college. Fast forward 25 years, and college prices are where they are, even at public institutions for some of the families. Merit may have gone through a different definition at a public four-year institution, where they may say, we're not going to do merit much at all anymore. We are going to use our limited state or federal funds to really focus on need. And as a state institution, that's our right, and that is what our mission is to use our dollars to provide the opportunity for citizens throughout the state. Private institutions have used merit in a twofold way. Number one, everybody gets a trophy, everybody gets a scholarship. It begins to be an attractor for many families that want the opportunity to be able to have that water cooler conversation, to be able to brag about the trophy that their student has earned in many ways. But it also becomes a discount mechanism. I have a $60,000 a year product, which individuals may or may not totally see the value in paying for. And so if I do a discount by offering a merit scholarship, even if the student is on the margin, if that means they're going to pay more to my institution in order to be able to enroll, it's better to have some revenue than no revenue at all. And so merit can be used in a variety of ways now. I think it clearly can be used to recognize the outstanding students in your pool and be an incentive to have them choose institution X over institution Y. Merit can be used to incentivize a opportunity for a middle class family, or even a family that may have no need to pick your institution because a prize has been given. Or merit may truly be the way of an institution meeting its class and distributing dollars in order to influence families to say yes to this school because of the combination of recognition and then the total value of what it brings.
So do you find that institutions need to sacrifice need in order to offer the merit? Because a lot of times that becomes the debate, that certain students aren't being offered need-based because of the merit.
I don't know that there's a universal answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
So the University of Texas is right down the road from us. And while I don't know all the ins and outs of their workings, I do know that they have chosen to shift dollars out of the merit bucket, not in totality, but they've shifted more of their dollars into the need-based bucket than in the merit-based bucket. They still recognize those very top students, but I will have overlap applicants that will get merit from us that may not get merit from a place like the University of Texas. And so I think the answer to your question is it varies. At a large state public school, yes, a solid student may not get merit, but still may find that that institution, and they may not qualify for need, but that institution still winds up being a more economical fit for them. Some students will say, wow, I got this phenomenal merit scholarship at a private institution, and it brought the cost down to the point that now the state public and this small private are actually very comparable in price. And then we get to that whole next level of what is important to Generation Z: outcomes, graduating on time, the perks that are available at one institution versus another. And then when cost is removed sometimes as a factor, you're really digging down to that next layer to ask, well, what's going to shape and influence me? How do I want my college experience to be defined? What are the important values of this? And can I accomplish them at one versus another? So from a consumer standpoint, from a parent, or from with you all working as consultants, you may get asked that question. And I think that probably it's most fair to say every institution has to weigh this very carefully. And sometimes it may be the institutional goals that drive the pendulum from one end of the scale to another. If a new president or chancellor has come in and says, this is our priority is to serve the underserved, and we're going to focus heavily on need, you may see a gradual shift away from merit. If you have a president that comes in that says, I want to raise the profile, then my guess is merit may trump need for a period of time in order to begin to establish that reputation and increase that profile. I don't know that the pendulum stops swinging. It just depends on what the school's mission or goals are, what the leadership is looking for, and how do you create that balance.
So I think that brings up another really good point, and that is institutional goals. And so it sounds like those play a big factor into this whole process.
Sure.
And so tell us a little bit more about that and how that affects, is it change from year to year? Is it something that's pretty consistent? Let's talk about that.
I think change often comes with leadership. That either can be the vision of a vice president of enrollment, or it can be the vision of a president, or it could even come higher, the vision of your board of trustees or board of directors. How does that trickle down? One would hope that it doesn't swing year to year. And the reason why is it takes our outreach, it takes our communication several years. Most institutions are now starting to communicate with sophomores. And if this month the goal is we're going to heavily recruit California, then that means I'm buying their names as sophomores and as juniors and as seniors. That means I'm sending individuals out there to travel and to work college fairs. I'm having counselors come to my campus. This comes kind of over time in a process. I can't flip a switch and all of a sudden get 75 kids from California in 1 year. There's a journey you have to travel. And so what I hope would happen is an understanding that this becomes the goal. We're now going to recruit more first-gen students. Okay, what does that mean? It means we're going to need probably more money for need-based funding. It may mean we need to travel in a different way. It may mean we need to buy our names in a different way. It may mean that we need to create brochures in a different language. And how do we accomplish that? Do we need to change our website? All of that can't be turned on a dime. And over time is how you build those pools and those reputations. And so I think in our work, there has to be a communication cycle that says we're happy to go for this goal, but this is how long it will take. and these are the expectations, and these are the costs that will come along with it. And if we do focus on first generation students, some of them may be outstanding scholars, but some of them may not fit the profile that you wanted us to also develop. And
Mm-hmm.
so a good enrollment manager is also having a conversation. Do these goals compete against each other? And which
Mm-hmm.
one do we find to be the most important? Which one do we wish to prioritize? You know, if we miss the mark on one, which one should we not miss the mark on? Those sorts of things. So it's really hard sometimes as an enrollment manager to take that top level vision and to make it come into action in a 1 year time period. And as schools are often challenged with the finances or not meeting enrollment goals, I think I worry for my colleagues that that silver bullet mentality may exist, and you can't solve that problem in 1 year. It generally takes about a 3 year period of time to work towards those goals.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do advisors or parents or others know what those goals are, what an institution is looking for?
I would encourage you all to be a part of communication lists that institutions may send out, participate in independent visits, go to things like HECA and IECA. I know last year in the state of Texas, both of those organizations had their conference here, and we were fortunate enough to be part of tours that brought groups to our campus and allowed us to have those conversations, allowed us to have conversations like this. Our families are saying X. Is this really how it works? Or what messages can we convey? When we bring you all to our campuses, either for an individual visit or as part of a group, the ability to sit down with a member of my staff and say, what is the president's goals? What are you all working towards as a member of the admissions staff can really help to understand how you can answer some of those questions from your parents. And as you know, some parents are very nervous through the process, and they may
Yeah.
ask questions that long tenured professionals may perceive to be naive. But we also know that in our work, the best thing that we can do is be partners and be great educators and help them demystify the process that may often seem so very scary, to make them feel comfortable and to help them realize that no, if you get a scholarship this year and the goals change, that your scholarship is not going to go away because those scholarships need to be used in a different format. No institution should work like that. And sometimes policies that get implemented midstream come to your advantage, and you may receive a different sort of pricing structure that helps your family. But higher education is not stagnant. And especially in the small private liberal arts world, we've got to be active in order to be able to sustain. But I would even go out there to say that our public school partners, you know, the big research tier 1 institutions, they can't afford to be stagnant either. They have got to find ways to do what we do within a different sort of pricing structure or budget structure in order to be able to accomplish goals. So it's an ongoing collaboration and education between all of us. And so by being on our mailing lists and getting our newsletter or getting our counselor updates or going on tours of our campuses, hopefully that educates you in a variety of ways that you can then turn around and be a partner with us to educate your families.
Well, that sounds like really good advice. And sometimes I think as counselors, advisors, we're afraid to ask those questions because we don't want to be too forward or, not sure if they'd be received well. So that's really helpful.
You all can think like parents. And if your parents are asking, what are the institutional goals? What's the institutional vision? I'm going to answer it for a parent. So why wouldn't I answer it for you? I think it's important to remember the partnership, or at least I hope we all remember the partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really how we see it. So if now is the time that we can take questions. I see we have a number of people on our audience. So if you've ever wanted to ask a Dean of Enrollment Management some questions, here is your opportunity. So there is a section that says Q&A that you can put questions in. We may have had some come into the chat, but I haven't seen any yet. So while people are thinking, let me ask you another question, and
Sure.
we just have a few more minutes. But there's a lot of discussion now too, Christine, about the role of admissions and merit in terms of diversity.
Oh,
And, having is it right to admit a diverse class versus everybody that's qualified and, everybody with the big quotation mark. So
right.
what kind of conversations have you heard, and what are some thoughts that you have about that regard?
We now in Texas are a minority majority state. And so I think that has caused us to take a step back and say, well, really, what is diverse? And what does diverse mean? For us, in some ways, diversity is not Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, or Austin. For some ways, for us, diversity is first generation. It may be athletes. It may be students in the fine arts. Diversity has such a rich and broad meaning that I think sometimes it's unfair that we strictly label it to the diversity definition 98% of the time is students of color.
Mm-hmm.
We are very fortunate that our incoming class is very naturally diverse. We typically see between 35 and 40% of our class being non-Anglo. And we've done that in a very natural way. We also live in a state of the part of the country that has a federal law or a federal decision against it from the Hopwood decision that says that institutionally we should not be awarding our funds to a certain particular class or race. And so we really have been mindful of that. We had partnered with an outside organization for a number of years to provide some diversity scholarships to students that we wanted to have as part of the Southwestern campus. And that's remained important to us. And I think that there are lots of institutions that define their diversity in very unique ways across the country. They have diversity recruitment officers. They're looking for a variety of things. But our job is to educate. And our job is not to question who. As a matter of fact, Southwestern's motto is not who, but what. What are we teaching? And why are we teaching? And what is our purpose in teaching? And I hope that that's what education across the country really means. We need all the people to be educated, especially as our country goes through its additional evolution. And if we're not educating them, then I think it begs a bigger question along the way.
Well, and I think that points out to who you're going to school with influences what that experience is.
Okay.
And, in my conversations, many of us have these conversations with our students. It would be really boring if they were all the same.
Yeah.
When they're working on their applications and things like that to tell their story and communicate their story and what's unique and about them is really important. And you don't want to go to school with everybody like you.
Absolutely.
And I think having that, and I'm glad you pointed out that diversity is many different things. I teach a UCLA class of special issues, and that's one of the topics we cover. And many students have grappled with that. Well, what is diversity? And it can be so much more than just race or ethnicity. And,
Right.
And as you pointed out, it can be different at different institutions.
Absolutely.
So that's very helpful. So it looks like we've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Kathy asks, do you and many colleges stack merit and need, or do you require students to take one or the other?
Kathy, I can't say that I know, and I don't know every institution, but I've interacted with a lot over my tenure. I can't say that I know of an institution that requires you to pick one or another. And it's important to know that federally, if you qualify for certain financial aid, you're entitled to it. So I think it's a question of if you qualify for merit at that institution, how does that then get combined with the federal dollars or the state dollars that you're also eligible for? But I can't say, well, I'm going to give Cindy this scholarship and therefore she doesn't get a Pell Grant. By law, she has to get her Pell Grant.
So, but would you reduce the amount because you can't award more than the cost of the institution.
Correct.
So sometimes does that become a factor as well?
Yeah, as we were discussing earlier, the unfortunate scenario is that state and federal funds rarely are going to get you to the point where you're going to cover the cost of education. And so I don't know that that's as much of a factor as it was in the past.
Mhm.
I do know that most institutions are going to carefully structure how much they give out in their own dollars. So
Mhm.
where there may be a difference is in the prioritization of how they put their dollars together. And it may
Mhm.
be that they award merit first, and then they're going to award all state and all federal, because it's not my money. I'm going to spend somebody else's money. And then I'll determine how much of my own institutional dollars I'm going to spend on a need-based student at that point in time. So it could be that it's a matter of how they package their students versus a choice of whether they give them A versus B.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And as you mentioned, now the cost of education has risen to such an extent, and the need base hasn't kept up with it, that those kinds of scenarios are fewer and far between.
Yeah.
I usually find those with my ag students here in
Okay.
Southern California. Once in a while, I have students
Sure.
get so many ag scholarships that they're beyond the cost of attendance. But that's usually the exception rather than the rule. So does Southwestern, this is from Clay, he says, does Southwestern still use a grid system of GPA and standardized test scores for giving out merit aid? If you have a certain SAT score or an ACT, you're entitled to this amount of merit scholarship.
Well, Clay, you must have a great memory and a nice relationship with Southwestern if you remember the grid system. It does not exist any longer. And we've gone into a kind of an internal scholarship program in which we've taken a more holistic approach. In part, we felt like there was more to a student applicant than just a test score and a GPA. But I think very honestly, the benefit of the grid system was that any of the families that you worked with, any of the families that visit our website could very easily and very clearly find themselves on the grid
Mm-hmm.
and know how much scholarship they would be receiving. The challenge of the grid system is that the one Clay is referring to ended at top quarter. I have probably a handful of schools, even in the Austin area, that will go outside of the top quarter, and that student would be a fantastic addition to our community and worthy of some merit dollars. And when you limit to the grid system, you're always losing out on an opportunity to potentially convert a student that would be very successful in your environment. And so it became a little more restrictive for us than what we wanted to work with. But really, for us, and now we have gone test score optional, it was a decision that we felt like students were more than two factors in the process, that we felt like if we were going to be holistic in admission, we need to have our scholarship perspective reflect that as well.
I think that's a very good point, because there are still some institutions that have
Absolutely.
those grids, and but having that flexibility, how does that affect net price calculators though? So if you're
Yes.
not having a cut and dried, if it's more holistic, just like the admissions process, then how do you reflect that in the net price calculator?
So part of it is the brilliant working of a vendor partner that Southwestern utilizes, that they do kind of an average of certain factors in our holistic review process. Net price calculators are never 100% guaranteed. They are estimates. And so, but what we have found is that it's pretty spot on when they use the averages that they use. So we feel very fortunate in that reflect that we have this great partner that helps us to shape our net price calculator to be really reflective of our program. But I know that that is not always a reflection of every net price calculator at every institution. And as a matter of fact, there's a really cool program out there. Oh, of course, I'm going to forget it right off the top of my head, but that doesn't ask a whole lot of questions and supposedly is pretty accurate on being able to project what you would earn from their institution as far as merit or need. My, gosh, my tuition, why am I drawing a blank, Cindy? I apologize. I'll have to think of it and we can put it in
Okay,
the
yeah, and I'm guessing one of our guests, Bill Smith, is on our call. He probably knows. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, and I think that brings up a good point, because a lot of times parents especially look to the net price calculators and say, okay, this is what exactly it's going to be, and understanding the purpose and the limitations as advisors so that we can guide families more accurately and more realistically on it is a good thing.
Well, and I'd tell you as an advisor, one of the things that is difficult but important to know today, my net price calculator is reflective of the scholarship and financial aid process that we have used to recruit the class of 19. If you're looking at it with a family today that's a class of 20 or 21, it's going to be a helpful guide, but I don't know what our scholarship model is going to look like this year. I don't know what sort of adjustments we're going to make in our need-based financial aid. We won't have that new net price calculator up until probably mid-September. And so there's always that dependency on the timing of when you do that looking as to, is it reflective of last year? Is it reflective of this year, et cetera, et cetera.
That's a very good point. And that's something, especially as you said, as advisors, to let families understand that time frame, I think is key as well. So we have one last question, and then
Okay.
it's Barbara asked, related to stacking, so going back to that question, parents are surprised that colleges first layer merit and then possibly add financial aid, not necessarily reducing the family's out-of-pocket expenses. Yeah, is that the way you commonly see it?
First, I'm reading the question one more time. First layer merit and then possibly need-based aid, not necessarily reducing the family's out-of-pocket. Well, I think the merit is first because, once again, that is the incentive.
Right.
And for some families,
oftentimes it comes with their admissions decision
that's right.
as well.
And for some of the families, that may be the only thing they get. Either we get a FAFSA that shows a very large EFC that does not qualify for any other institutional aid, or the family never files the FAFSA. So the merit is the important thing because it's constant for most likely the largest part of the pool. And as you referred to, Cindy, lots of schools are sending it out as part of their admission these days. It's almost a 1-2 punch, either in the acceptance letter or shortly after the acceptance letter. And so then we have to get down to the next layer. And that can be varied because when does the family file the FAFSA? While it opens in October, we know that there are many families that don't file until January or February. And so obviously I have to go out with the merit first and then the need-based aid. And as I was alluding to earlier, I'm going to spend the state or the federal government's money first before then we put in our institutional money to fill in any gaps. And yes, all of that does reduce out-of-pocket expenses because we're going from total cost of attendance down to a new figure. But merit is that warning shot these days, or that first shot across the bow. It's not necessarily warning, it's a first shot across the bow. And then we put in based on the timing of the FAFSA. So if there's a partnership that we can work on together, the earlier the families file the FAFSA, the better, so that we can get the most accurate data in front of them to make an educated decision on their investments.
That makes sense. And that really does. I mean, there's a psychological advantage to that as well when a family gets an admissions and they have a merit scholarship. And that's why I see many colleges that are taking advantage of the early FAFSA are really putting themselves out there at the front, because psychologically, you know, college families like being accepted by a college. Like, somebody wants me.
That's right.
And they're going to give me money to come there. So, and then filling in the rest of it later, you know, as the forms and need is established, that can make a big difference. So,
thank you,
Nancy
Benton, for filling in my brain. It is my intuition.
I was going to say, yep, so she found it. So, well, thank you very much. This has been just delightful as always. We're going to see you in Rhode Island next
Absolutely.
week, correct?
Yes,
and,
ma'am.
those of you that are watching will be interviewing we're going to be talking to Steve Syverson in August, and we're going to talk to Stefano Papaleo from Lynn University in July, and he's going to be talking about Generation Z and how they have a whole curriculum, whole technology, media approach that really has revolutionized their campus. So, Christine, thank you very much.
Thanks,
It's been a delight. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. This concludes our interview for today.
Have a great week.